if you design for a baby, you're designing well for everyone. You're designing well for someone who uses a cane to walk, for someone in a wheelchair, someone who needs more time crossing the street at the crosswalk, someone who needs cleaner air to breathe. Generally, if you're designing a city that works well for a baby, you're designing a city that works well for just about everyone.
I'm Miranda Rake.
And I'm Sarah Wheeler, and this is The Mother of It All, where we take on motherhood through the lens of culture and culture through the lens of motherhood. So you went to the witch store this weekend?
Yes. So since the, the thing that happened in our country, I mean, I've been curious about the rise of witchery for a while.
Yeah,
and
you've been talking a lot about witches.
I've been talking a lot about witches.
You've been sending me a lot of witch content.
I know.
Keep it coming.
I realized I go through these phases, right? I was really interested in psychedelics for a while, and I think my thing right now is witches. And so I was listening to that BBC podcast, and
I gave it a listen. What's it called? The Witch?
It's just called Witch.
Yeah, I listened to it yesterday, actually, on your recommendation.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I mean, it's good for a neighborhood walk in the fall. But yeah, I was kind of curious about it, and I got this book about. It's a very base, being a witch 101 is kind of what it is. And,
Dummy, what's the dummies guy?
Yeah, Witchcraft for Dummies.
Exactly.
It's kind of like that. It's modern witchcraft, So some of it is a little bit almost like craft projects. You feel like you're reading and I'm not crafty, so I was but then it was make a little altar, and an altar, I guess, is just a place where you have just little trinkets. And I love trinkets.
Who doesn't love trinkets?
Who doesn't love trinkets, right? And you change it seasonally. So your winter altar might have some evergreens and a piece of holly and a cool rock
I'm really into
found,
this.
right? Or a feather or whatever. And you do a little candle, and you get to change the candles for I'm so into this. So after guitar, I took the kids. I was you want to go to the witch store? And so we went to this. It's not it's called an herbarium, but it's totally a witch store. And but it was funny because being in there with the kids, and I take them there a lot. We formerly have called it the rock store, but I figured I'd just tell it like it is.
We say witch store. Yeah. There's ancient ways around the corner from us, and I just call it the witch. That's what it is. And
nice.
Yes, they have very cool rocks, which is appealing to children.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and so...
Witches really know how to work their way around a rock.
And all the tarot decks are very inviting to kids. But my kids started touching everything. And I was trying to be a good, responsible adult and, being well, let's look with our eyes and don't touch. But I definitely felt a little bit of tension from I assume, witches who run the store.
Were you worried there might be some kind of curse? Or I don't want to do negative stereotypes of witches. Right. I know we're trying to fight. I think positively about witches. But if I was a witch and a kid was fucking with my shit, I might just be I'm just going to make all your Honey Nut Cheerios taste like regular.
I did feel that. I felt it was maybe, I just thought witches would be friendlier to kids. But I guess historically they're not always so friendly to kids. And
I bet our producer Allie, who is a self-identified witch, I bet she's itching to jump in on this. I would just say on her behalf that I'm sure there's no one kind of witch.
Totally,
right? It's
absolutely.
Nuance. Yeah. So
okay.
Don't
Allie
rule
is
all the witch stores out just because. Yeah, Allie says in the chat, absolutely, all caps.
Yeah.
So maybe you need a different witch store.
Well, so when we were leaving, there was a witch who was shopping for stuff, and she held the door for us, and she asked my kids about which rocks they chose and why, and I felt very nice about that. And she was very witchy. I mean, she had a lot. I was looking at all of her jewelry and trying to find the pentagram, and I didn't see it, but I'm sure it was there.
Somewhere kind of subtle. I bet.
Totally.
I mean, an altar, it does kind of feel like it's a representation of something that I would want to kind of hold on to as we move into this next political chapter. Is I can imagine an altar would be grounding. What's the place I'm going to come back to when I'm seeing,
Yeah.
headlines that make me want to scream. And
Well, you
yeah.
know, you're settling
What-
into your new house, right? And we've
Am
been in
I?
our house. I hope. So we've been in our house for 2 years, and I've like when I freak out, you know, when I get overwhelmed and freak out, inevitably, it always comes out as I need a place that's just for me.
Oh, well, that's an office. That's different. An
No,
office.
but what I think I need is an altar. I mean, like a thing that's for me that is not
Yeah.
for work. That's like for just for me.
Just
And
a
I-
little kind of alcove.
Yeah, I used to think it was a corner with a pink. I had this vision of like a pale pink Smeg fridge filled with champagne. That used to be my vision of like my space.
This is very specific, and I'm
know.
all about it.
But now I'm like, oh, and I realized thanks to Witch Reddit that I kind of already have an altar because I have this little trinket place where I put like shells that I love.
You're
or,
a
like,
natural witch.
I might be.
Wow.
Maybe we
Where
all
does it
are.
live? Where does it live?
Well, right now it's on the top of my bureau, and it's actually on this beautiful mirrored tray that I got from David's grandma when she died.
Mirrored tray, yes.
Right, and I'm kind of like, and I have this beautiful
From a dead woman, yes. This is all
right?
also yes,
Yeah.
and the little champagne fridge. I mean, can't we have both?
Ooh, I hadn't thought of both.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna look for some altar space.
Yeah.
I mean, the headline in the new house right now is ants.
Oh no.
Is like, yeah, and then I have so I'm like a city person. Well, we're gonna talk about this today. I was born and raised in cities. Like, if like I woke up this morning and like an Oakland City bus driver was in my living room in his underwear, I would be like, hey, what's up, Daryl? Like, you want to shower first? But an ant in my house is like a 5-alarm fire. I'm just like, I can't do. I love wildlife in the wild, but in the city, I'm like, you don't belong here. So there are a lot of ants, and my husband tried to get the ants with like the traps, but it ended up just drawing more of them all around the room. And last night at like 11 p.m. we discovered like the tens of thousands of them. And then I think I have a lot of anger right now that I need to express, like a lot of Americans or people throughout the world.
Yeah.
And I'm worried I'm taking it out on the ants, and I'm not sure if I'm setting a good example for my kids. Their ant rhetoric is very violent, and I know it just comes straight from me. Like today, my son was like, I hope they bring the poison back to the queen, and then they'll have no more eggs. And I was just like,
have a queen? Maybe.
I would believe. I got to tell you, I don't really know, but I think we should take an 8-year-old's word like on ant culture. They probably are more in tune with it than I am. So apparently there's a queen. She lays all the eggs, and he wants her to die a terrible death. And that's coming straight from me. So I get torn. Like I get in these fits of rage, and I take the my like method, pine scented spray, and just like go kind of like machine gun the ants down. And then I'm kind of like, I'm worried that my children are gonna be sociopaths. But that's kind of the work of parenting.
Well, ants don't bother me, but David hates ants, and he the gel. I recommend the gel. TLDR, he puts this gel stuff on these pieces of foil and leaves it all over the place. And it works.
I think that's essentially what we're doing in like a slightly different form, where like they get it, they take it back,
and everybody dies.
But it is I'm also very sensitive right now about violence, so like I have this mix of pleasure with like they take it back to their homes, but then I'm also like, oh,
like self-loathing.
Babies are. I don't even know if they have babies if you just go straight to adulthood.
I don't know. We'll have to watch the movie Ants.
Yeah, I need Ants for Dummies.
There's Auntie from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which
that was a good ant. Like witches, there's all
ant.
kinds of ants.
Yes,
we should remember that nuance.
It's hard to share your house with bugs. I mean, I don't mind ants. I really don't. I feel like I don't see them. I'm just like, oh, look, a bunch of ants. But I'm not advocating that perspective. And we
it's probably healthier. Also, the way that you just said "share your house with bugs" was possibly the cutest thing I've ever heard in my life. Would you come up with some kind of song to elaborate on the vision that you have of just like coexisting?
Well, you know, Griffin is always working on songs in his guitar
Okay,
class.
give him that
So
prompt.
I'll add it to the list. He wrote a great
exactly.
one about potatoes in a hot tub.
Yeah. Wow, that's something we're always thinking about.
Yeah, exactly.
As a culture.
We'll move on to cities, but I should say that I freaked out a little bit when there was a dead rat recently in front of our house.
Oh, rats are just
in our zone, like on our lawn, you know, like, and I was like, oh,
okay, no,
God.
Whatever ambivalence I have about ant murder, it
yeah.
goes out the window with rats. Rats are your enemies. Every time a rat dies, humans, you know, get bolstered. Yeah.
It's the Nutcracker perspective.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk about ants and rats all day, and I know that's what our listeners
vermin
are really
is
here
an
for.
urban topic.
Yes.
It's not. Yeah, we can just transition.
But I'm very excited about our guest.
Me too.
So we're gonna talk about the idea of child-friendly cities, which that's a thing. People think about that. It's very exciting. And our guest, Katie Beck, is a policy fellow at the London School of Economics, where she manages the Urban 95 Academy. Along with her team, she helps municipal leaders design child-friendly cities. I found Katie's work through Lucy Jones, who was on the podcast last season, talking about her book, Matrescence, which I'm obsessed with as well.
Yes. Worthy obsession.
Yes. So welcome, Katie. We are so excited to dig into this topic with you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here talking with you guys. I actually have a child-friendly witch store story I could share with you.
Yes, please.
Share it.
I live in London. I live in East London. And I was walking with my daughter, who's 5, the other day, and there was like a witch store, similar to what you're both describing. And she wanted to go, and obviously all the crystals in the window. Mm-hmm. And I had trepidation that she was going to touch everything and break everything. And I was feeling that tension you described. But the woman behind the counter, I'm going to assume she's a witch. Mm-hmm. She was like, come in. There was kind of a cauldron full of little, you know, semi-precious stones. And she was like, just when my heart rate and like sweat was starting of, oh my God, let's get out of the shop. She was like, pick one out, like sweetheart to my daughter. And she went and picked one. And the woman was like, show me what you chose. And then she was like, oh, that's an amazing choice. That means, I don't know what it was going to help her sleep and help her find her voice if she had something important to say. And I did feel pressure then to like buy all the tarot cards, which I didn't, but it was amazing. It was so sweet. And then my daughter like held it in her hand and like she put it under her pillow and she keeps saying, I think it is working, Mom. So
I love that. You know, my favorite episode so far of the Witch podcast is about placebo. Like she talks to various people about the power of ritual and placebo, and in a really careful way, like not implying that the people who believe that this is really working like are wrong necessarily, but also exploring the possibilities of like the ways that our brain and body work, and if we believe something is helping us, what that does. And I just think that's cool. I've been always very skeptical, and I feel like as I get older, I'm a little more willing to like, I don't know, be softer about things like that. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. So Katie, we always start by asking who's caring for your kids right now. So where is your 5-year-old?
So I have 2 kids. My daughter is 5 and my son is 9, and it's about 5 p.m. here in London. So the school got out at 3:30 and the children are with their father. So I heard and saw pictures. They got drenched in the rain on the way home. They took a bath, and I think everyone's warm and dry inside now.
Lovely.
Um,
And you look like you have an office. Is there champagne in there?
I know. I was like, oh yeah, the pink
cauldron
fridge. No, I'm in my office at work. There's no fridge. There's no champagne.
You're at like the university.
I'm at the LSE. Yes, beautiful. I am. Yeah, I have. It is my own space here to work, which is nice. No one else is in the office today. I have been working on an office space at home. I was listening to you talking about your altar. I don't have Yeah, it is like a space. I usually work from home. It's rare I'm in the office, but yeah.
Nice to have options.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into this because I'm so excited to think about this with you. Ever since I encountered your work, I can't get the phrase child-friendly cities like out of my mind. Um, and so I want to just hear what you have to say about how can urban policy and urban design support people who care for young children?
I mean, it's a great question. So as you mentioned, the program I run is called the Urban 95 Academy. So that's kind of a place to start. So it's a bit convoluted for an American context. 95 centimeters is the height of a healthy 3-year-old child. So the kind of
What is that, like 6
so
feet,
it's
9 feet? I can't. I'm
yeah.
American.
So we'll change it to feet. So it's 3 feet. So if you are the question we put to like city, municipal leaders who take our program, if you could experience your city from 3 feet off the ground, what would you change? So it's sort of like a starting point to think, differently about how you would approach urban design. So when I talk to people about child-friendly cities, usually people think I'm talking about playground design. And they're like, oh yeah, we have a good playground, or oh, we could use, but that's not. Play is important, obviously. Kids need to play. That's a small piece, but it's not it. So it's kind of thinking much more broadly and holistically about a city that centers a child and a caregiver. So when I talk about children in the program, we're dealing with young children. We're talking about babies, pregnant women, babies 0 to 5 years old. So you're almost always also talking about a caregiver when you're talking about a child that young. So I guess a way to think about it in like a really step back big way is we're trying to bridge the gap between the science around early childhood development and the practice of urban design and urban policy. So we know that how children start in life, where they live, what kind of interaction they have with their caregivers, these are like really basic things, have a huge impact on how their brain develops. And the kind of crux of early childhood development, billions of neural connections are made in the first few years of life, and more than any other time in our lives. So it's super important to get that right. It's often described as the building blocks. So you don't have a chance to kind of lay that foundation for again. And what happens in those first 5 years has a huge impact on lifelong outcomes for children. So that's kind of, if you ground your thinking about urban space in that, that's kind of a starting point. So I think some people find the economic argument the most compelling. So a really like a popular statistic often used with the proponents of how important early childhood development is, that for every $1 invested in high quality early childhood provision, there's up to $16 return on that investment. And that's kind of taking into consideration things like better health outcomes, less interaction with law enforcement, better educational outcomes, better relationships. So it's like for your whole lifetime, if you can really zero in and do well for children in the beginning of life, you're going to set everyone up, including society as a whole, for better outcomes.
Yeah.
So what does that design look like if it's not playgrounds, or not just playgrounds?
Yeah, like what are the practical applications? I know we talked about, you had some examples of cities that are trying to implement some of these ideas.
Definitely. So some kind of, I'll give you one really specific example, which is air pollution. So we know that children breathe air at about 4 times the rate of an adult. And
I didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah, wow.
I just learned.
Well, there you go. And obviously children's lungs are developing, their brains, their internal organs, everything is developing. It's so crucial, So breathing in really polluted air as your brain and your lungs are developing will have massive negative impacts, for your health outcomes. So if you imagine kind of bending down, as I'm sure you have both done many times, to help your kid tie their shoelace, your head and their head might be about on level with an exhaust pipe of a car. So this is what I mean when you kind of reimagine your city from that viewpoint. And so and air pollution is universal. The World Health Organization says over 90% of children breathe air that's so polluted it puts their health and development at risk. 600,000 children every year die from respiratory infections that are caused by air pollution. So this is
Wow.
fundamental, and
Yeah.
it affects everyone. So that's just one example of a really specific thing. And the solution might be really different in different cities, local context, different behaviors, different kind of trends and patterns in different cities, it would mean that you might have to look for different kinds of ways to combat that problem. But those are like universal problems.
Would like Katie, like in Oakland, they're starting to transition to electric buses. I'm thinking of that as, I mean, I got chills when you were talking about being at the level of an exhaust pipe like that. I never thought about that before. And all I could see were all the buses that go around Oakland. I mean, actually, I'd like more of them, but the ones that run on gas, so electric vehicles might be one solution to that specific problem.
Definitely. I mean, public
Yeah.
transportation generally is a really good solution. I think, in like planning, people talk a lot about active transport. So active mobility, walking, cycling, ways other than using an automobile. So anything that's kind of going to encourage more trips taken by foot, by bus, by train, by bike than by individual automobiles, probably going to improve air quality.
There's so much that you're thinking about in this arena. And so thinking about the child development aspect seems like one thing. And then I wonder about the relationship between, we've talked about caregivers in this context. Like, it seems like over and over again, what I return to is like, if we can help their caregiver be steady-ish in many ways, then the child is going to have a better outcome, right? Like, so I'm curious about the caregiver element that you've mentioned in urban planning. Like, how do you consider caregiver well-being in urban design?
100%. And I think maybe you talked about this when you had Lucy Jones on the program, because kind of in like a step further from what I was mentioning before about, early childhood development and how kids' brains change and develop so rapidly at that stage. There's interesting new research around how caregivers' brains change as well. So not just in terms of pregnancy and childbirth and kind of physiological changes that birthing people go through, but actually the act of caregiving, whether you've gestated a child or not, changes your brain. It's called neuroplasticity. So it's another really key time that there's serious kind of neural activity going on that can be supported. And it's actually kind of common sense things. What does a caregiver need? So are there public toilets? What, if you imagine, it's big things and small things, but imagine what, the lived experience of someone caring for a small child. They need to safely cross the street. They need a place to change a diaper or a place to quickly get a child to a toilet if they're potty training. When a parent is stressed, that immediately transfers to the child. I remember someone telling me about their experience of walking through their city with their child, and they could kind of, as they felt the terror or the fear of their kid running into the street in a busy intersection, they're holding their kid's hand so tightly, and that kind of stress and fear is transmitting directly to the child, and then they're taking that on, and their cortisol levels are rising in their body. So it's kind of it's super crucial, the well-being of a parent, and it takes different depending on the context, it depends what that's going to be. But I guess you could kind of think about it like in an airplane, how, I'm sure you've seen, you have to put your air mask on first before you can help anyone else. So the same goes for caregivers. But as a society, we need to support caregivers so that they can then support the people in their care. But I mean, thinking kind of practically, I know you guys both were kind of give us some examples about, what this looks like in a city. So one
Yeah.
really important thing is public space. In academia, we love like frameworks. So I can try to give you a little bit of a framework of different things to make. What you're thinking, is this city child friendly? You can kind of measure against, a number of things. So
Oh, I'm kind of afraid to do that with my. I grew Miranda and I both grew up in cities. We live in cities and raise our kids in cities now. And yeah, go ahead. I'm fascinated and a little nervous.
Right. How would our cities do? Probably.
Yeah.
well, I guess you
Poorly.
could think about public space, especially when we're thinking about cities. City governments have control usually around public space. That's kind of within their remit to maintain, to pay for.
Mm.
And so think about where are the places that kids and caregivers go? It's probably homes, school, parks, the doctor, the grocery store, whatever else. The context could change city to city. So a good question is, are these places connected? Ideally,
Mm.
there's often a really trendy kind of, concept in urban planning right now is the 15-minute city. Can you get to all the places you need to get by foot in 15 minutes? Is it safe? Is there pedestrian infrastructure? And it's a bit different in the US. Here in the UK, a lot of our infrastructure, predates cars and things are kind of developed more for walking and cycling. And also, so when you think about like, it's not just the destination, but getting there. What is the journey between all those places that kids and caregivers frequent? Like that potentially is where you're spending a lot of your time, and it's potentially where that really important interaction between a child and their caregiver is taking place. So do those, our space is connected that then can support good connection between kids and caregivers, and connection between caregivers and other caregivers, like that builds trust, that kind of makes healthier communities. So that's one thing: public space design, neighborhood design, connected spaces. We talked a little bit about air quality, and that's super important. Almost all of the cities that come to take part in the program, we've had over 300 cities from all over the world. That's a universal problem. So and it's often a bit of low-hanging fruit as well if you want to make a change. So a lot of cities, they don't know. First, you need to have good data. Is air quality actually a problem? We probably all have a hypothesis, knowing how many cars are on the road, maybe. But so a lot of cities, they decide to put air quality monitors around schools specifically. And then once they have the information about if the air quality, how bad it is, then they can act. They can make a change. So, and maybe then thinking about, well, what are the barriers to that active travel that is kind of the goal? Are there sidewalks?
Yeah.
Are there crosswalks? Is it safe to walk?
Yeah.
Like, why are so many cars coming to this? Yeah. I think about, I live maybe half a mile from my kid's school, but in order to get there, we have to go under a freeway overpass. A pretty redundant freeway that there's talk about tearing down, the 980 in Oakland, which would be amazing. But there's some pollution there, and also some kind of lack of safety. There's an encampment of unhoused folks who are, usually pretty coexist pretty well with the rest of the city, but under that freeway. So it adds a level of caregiver stress, like you were saying. For me, there's a level of vigilance. There are a lot of potholes in the street, so biking is we do bike, but it's a little dangerous.
Sarah had a terrible run-in.
Yeah, I was actually in the hospital, with from a pothole on my bike recently. So the threat is real. And then when you show up at the school, it's a small street that isn't meant to, have that many cars. So there's a lot of double parked cars. It feels kind of dangerous when you're moving in and out. But there isn't a nice big friendly bike lane, like you said. There isn't a crosstown bus. So there's a lot of north to south buses in Oakland, but there's no bus that would bring us from our home to the school. So yeah, I'm just thinking about, would those be examples of what you're describing, the active transportation?
Yeah, totally. And that's such an interesting kind of array of different barriers. It's not actually, in your case, it sounds like that the distance is so great, you wouldn't be able to walk to school. But it's like all these other barriers in place. So that's the kind of thing, like what we're really talking about in terms of cars, or air pollution in this example, it's behavior change. So if we think actually we do have a common goal of improving cities for children, then what are some of the barriers? Okay, in this case with air pollution, it's or not getting, not having the opportunity to walk to school, if that's what we think is a goal that we want. The barriers are like the road could be improved. Filling in potholes isn't actually too challenging or too onerous, even for a cash-strapped city. Maybe some or the sidewalks aren't wide enough. It kind of depends, but I think once you figure out, like, rather than having a starting point of cars are bad, we need to get rid of cars, which is going to be super controversial and probably will never go anywhere. If you start with, we have a common goal, and that's we want to improve our cities for children and caregivers. Everyone, you're going to be pretty hard pressed to find someone who puts their hand up and say, no, I want children to have worse outcomes. Even if you don't agree on anything else, children can be quite, this type of lens can be quite uniting. So then, well, what are the barriers? And maybe once you start breaking it down that way, they're kind of surmountable things. Maybe it's actually most people in this neighborhood want a bike lane. Then that might be something that's pretty attainable. Or we really want the city to fill in the potholes, and then more people would ride their bike, and then more people would ride their bike because they see more people riding their bike, and then all of a sudden you're kind of seeing how like behavior change can happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we spoke before, I remember you mentioned working with particularly Barcelona and Bogota as two cities who are working to center child and caregiver well-being in their planning efforts. I wonder if you could talk about that again, because I remember both of them were doing really interesting things.
I'll share a little bit about Bogota. This is something, Bogota was doing this well before they ever participated in a program. So it's not something that Urban 95 Academy would dream of taking credit for, but they have done something so interesting. So, and like it kind of shows on a large scale what really thoughtful kind of initiatives could look like, especially around care. Mm-hmm. So in Bogota, it was actually the first female and the first openly gay elected mayor, Claudia Lopez. It was under her administration. And she also worked with an amazing team, one woman in particular, Diana Rodriguez, who was the Secretary for Women's Affairs. This is kind of their project called Care Blocks. And it's a really fascinating case study. And it hasn't, I don't think, been replicated, but you could see it really could be. So they started out with good data. So they knew over 50% of the population in the city are female, and 30% of them do unpaid care work as their main activity. So 7 hours a day, cooking, cleaning, caring for other people, not only children, but children, elderly, sick people with disabilities. And so what was really different is Mayor Lopez and her team recognized this. They recognize this work as crucial to functioning society. So, generally unpaid domestic work, it's invisible. And I've heard you guys speak about this on your podcast before. It's not counted in GDP. It's not respected. It's not really valued. So first of all, they're recognizing it, making it visible. And then the way they framed the problem was really interesting. So it's this disproportionate division of labor. But they framed it around not only as a cause of financial poverty, but as time poverty. So because these women, all of their time is taken up doing care work, they don't have time to do anything else, to go to school potentially, or finish school, to go to university, to participate in political life, to be physically fit. So they kind of identified the problem. And then what they did was to create something called a care system called Care Blocks. So usually using already existing infrastructure where people are already. Often if you try to build something brand new and get people to go to it, it's not going to work so well. It's taking existing infrastructure, some places that are already vibrant, people are already there, and adding more to it. So the idea of Care Blocks is to concentrate services and infrastructure and to provide care for the people that the caregivers are caring for. So providing childcare, other kinds of care for elderly, to free those women up to then access provision also provided in those care blocks. So, professional training, dance classes, laundry facilities, and crucially, another thing included in those care blocks was something they called a care school for men. So for men to learn how to bottle feed babies, to cook,
Oh
do
my
laundry.
God.
So it's like,
I'm thinking of hair. It sounds like hair club for
it does
men.
sound like, it does sound like
But
Hair Club for
with
Men.
a
But it's
much more
Hair
lofty
Club for
goal.
men. This
Yeah.
sounds incredible. I
Absolutely
mean,
incredible.
I'm just incredible.
So you're
Like,
talking about,
yeah.
are you literally talking about like there's childcare at the laundromat, or the laundromat is more proximate to other things?
It's actually more kind of, it's bigger than that. So it's an actual block, kind of like a city block. I can share some links with you to show you diagrams.
We'll link to, yeah.
So
Mhm.
within this
I'm a
kind
visual
of,
learner.
compound, you could say, or this kind of
Yeah.
block, it's all accessible by foot or by bike. And within that
Mm-hmm.
area, that's all walking distance, you have all these different services and infrastructures all proximate to each other. So
This is incredible.
incredible. It's
I
so thoughtful, so well thought out. And the other
Mhm.
amazing thing, and talking to Diana about how they were able to achieve it, is they did so much deep work getting all the different departments, all the different stakeholders on board together. You think
Mhm.
how hard it is to like get your own family or your friends to agree on anything, like getting all these different departments in a city who all have their own competing needs and priorities and wants to agree, this is all of our priority, and then get them all to kind of put their resources in there, to collaborate. But they did it. So they started with the pilot. I think they've implemented 19 care blocks across the city, and also some care buses. So kind of providing some of the same services, but in a way that they could meet people that are more remote that might not be able to access the care blocks. So
Oh my
that's
God, I just wanted to be like, get me on a care bus. Just put me on.
I know. I bet they have the little champagne fridge. Well, Katie,
That's incredible.
You've mentioned kind of that the foundation to all of this is recognizing that care matters. And, that this was a queer female, mayor. And we know, I mean, with the election results, that just being a woman does not mean that you center care. But I've been thinking a lot about the ways that kind of the frameworks that our cities are built around, just kind of theoretically, and what we value. And I've been reading this book. I brought it to show you all. Do you know this one, Katie? Leslie Kern's Feminist City. And it's just blowing my mind. Of course, I would assume that basically anything is in the modern world was built with men and white middle class men in mind. But the way that we're thinking about how caregivers kind of are not served by the city. She was even talking about just like the fact that a lot of caregivers go on and off public transportation all day. Like if you're dropping off two different kids in two different places, and then you're going to your work, and then you have to, right, like go to the laundromat in the middle of your day, that a lot of our public transportation systems are built to have you charged every single time you come off and on, and so even the way that we ask people to pay for public transport is holding in mind that the average city person is this essentially, middle-class man who goes to work in the morning one way and comes to work in the evening the other way. And so disentangling kind of all of that from what we think about when we plan cities sounds really challenging.
It's interesting. I mean, I love that book, and I think she talks. I think Leslie talks about it in that book. But so exactly what you're getting at, this idea that generally cities are planned for an able-bodied white man to
ableism is a huge factor too that I think about a lot.
And like you said, to go from point A to point B, to go from home to work. So it was in Vienna in the 1990s. This they kind of did an interesting piece of research where they asked people like, how do they get around the city? And that's where this kind of, I think this was kind of uncovered a bit at that time. So men were like, yeah, we go from home to work, often in the car. And everyone's like, yeah, great. And that's how the city's planned. But women were like, well, we go from home to the grandparents' house, to nursery, to school, to work, on women, women use public transportation at much higher rates than men. So, kind of breaking open this discussion about how actually that kind of design isn't serving most of, even a majority of society. And so Vienna was kind of pioneering in this idea of gender mainstreaming, which I think Leslie talks about in that book. So every decision made at high levels, every budgetary decision made has to be kind of measured against how does this impact gender equality in the city. So it is a challenge. Most cities aren't there, but I think it is an attainable goal, especially if you have more lived experiences, more diverse experiences in positions of decision-making power. You know,
Well, you mentioned that mostly women, right? Isn't it mostly female leaders who have children who come to you?
I tried to look and get some actual like numbers, some stats on that, and we don't kind of have like a gender breakdown of all of our participants, but it is compared to other executive education programs, we skew female. And often what I find, we have the people who take the program, we have each city is represented by a team of 3 people. And I mean, women are heavily represented in the course. And it's usually one person kind of leading the charge and getting everyone else on board. And often it's someone who, they have children. So I remember even in the beginning of when we were putting this program together, we did have some, kind of comments or, well, I'm not sure, traffic engineers are really going to be that interested in babies. Like, well, actually, one of the first cities that applied to the program was from Tbilisi, Georgia. And it was 3 women from the traffic engineering department. And you bet your bottom dollar, some of them have had to traverse the city with their own children. So it's like, I think, unfortunately, it shouldn't be that only if you've, had to carry a crying, screaming baby who's trying to breastfeed and like poo at the same, on a train that you're like, oh, well, I know what this is about and I want to try to fix it. Everyone should try to, have the best interests of, the most youngest, most vulnerable people in society in mind. But
Well, it also seems like an opportunity for mothers to, be allies for other marginalized people, right? One of the things that Leslie Kern talks about is, is thinking about how both kind of are asking for more caregiver-oriented cities can help disabled people, people of color, and also how it might impact them, in negative ways. And I'm thinking about, the intersectionality of it all. We had an interview last season with Jessica Slice, who's a disabled writer and mother. And she talked about how she sees a lot of the kind of grief and trauma of early parenting as kind of a realization that you're disabled, that all of a sudden, parents become disabled in a lot of ways. If we were a birthing parent, we might be physically unwell. And then there's this piece that, I'm sure you think about a lot about having to move a baby out through the world, encountering difficulty with, a stroller access.
I mean, the
right?
basic, the stroller.
Exactly.
I mean, our city, so in Portland, I don't know, Katie, I know you know Portland. I think as cities go, Portland might be trying to be decently accessible. And certainly we have these bike avenues. And, I think probably we're relatively fortunate, but it could be always better. But when I was pushing my kid around, I don't know, I thought, oh, Portland does a good job. I had this idea that, most of our corners, most of our crosswalks, I know it is standard now that you would have it sloped for wheelchairs and so on. But when I was pushing my baby around in the stroller, when Griffin was a baby, I realized that tons of intersections have not been improved yet.
And tons of elevators aren't in service.
Oh my
and there
gracious.
are even stations that don't have them at all. And the kind of the kinship that you feel to the physically disabled world is so, I found it overwhelming.
And I felt so dumb for not having, I shouldn't say dumb, but I was like, I'm only thinking about this now that I'm experiencing this.
Right.
And it kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, completely.
So I wonder, Katie, are there ways that centering caregivers in cities kind of benefits everyone?
I mean, 100%. I think I've heard people say, once you become a parent, well, you do. And, you've both just really, described it really well there. Your whole relationship to the city changes have every decision you have to
Yeah.
make. Can I go to that park? Oh no, there isn't actually a toilet there. Oh no, I have to go around the other block because there's no drop curb there. I can't get this toilet. It changes, and some people say it like radicalizes them, you know. But I think definitely
Yeah.
all some of
Yes.
these
Yeah.
basic principles we're talking about, if you design for a baby, you're designing well for everyone. You're designing well for someone who uses a cane to walk, for someone in a wheelchair, someone who needs more time crossing the street at the crosswalk, someone who needs cleaner air to breathe. Generally, if you're designing a city that works well for a baby, you're designing a city that works well for just about everyone.
So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're seeing people do or try to do, kind of looking forward, that you're most excited about?
It's interesting to see kind of the different approaches, that cities take. So we had an interesting example. I thought a really like compelling story from Halio, which is part of Athens in Greece. So they have very car-centric, city, and they were really trying to get rid of some parking spaces basically, and free up those spaces that had been allocated for parking to make them more livable, playable, kind of human spaces. But it met with total, resistance.
My getting rid of parking lots feels like, oh my gosh, it's such a huge
it's
thing.
hugely controversial. It's hugely unpopular, universally. But they were interesting. So they were met with, resistance, but they decided to have some pilots. So just for temporary, weekend on a Sunday, remove parking from one street. And
the city was
trying. So this is the city government. So this is everyone who participates in our program are municipal leaders there. So this was their little pilot, just for, I think it was just a few parking spaces, just for one afternoon on a Sunday. And rather than saying like, we want to take, the city is saying, we don't want parking, we want a playground. They just moved the cars, had some kids come in with their families, gave them some chalk and some stuff, and let the kids go. So rather than trying to say why it's more important, they let people see how that space could be used if kids had free reign over it, which is really compelling and convincing. And then they were really bold to say to these parents, because you have to remember, like often one person is a parent, a car owner, a pedestrian, a cyclist. It isn't this binary, like us against them. We're all sort of multifaceted. We all use the city in lots of different ways. So
everyone's trying their best.
But so
well, most of us.
They then ask people, like, what is important to you? Is it important for you to have a place for your car? Or is it important for you to have a place for your kid? Which I thought was like, just, it's a really challenging thing. And that was such an interesting kind of creative way to address the problem. And I think they really did change some minds, or, move the needle a little bit in that, with that pilot.
Like in Portland, I don't know if this is true in the Bay Area too, Sarah, but I assume it's lots of places. In the pandemic, we, restaurants, cafes, all of these had to expand into the street so they could have seating outside. And I'm thinking of an intersection close to us here on 30th and Killingsworth where, this cafe, there's a bunch of cafes kind of all together, and the city closed down this whole street, and they painted it. They painted this rainbow on it. And my kid, close to traffic in the pandemic, we would go and we would just ride. He could ride and I could have coffee and he could just ride on this rainbow. And it has never reopened to traffic. It is permanent now. And there's some of that all over the city, and even places where the road opened back up, the restaurant has been able to keep that area that used to be parking, and now it's seating, which also makes, it's harder to park, but it also makes me drive slower because there's people sitting right there. And it's very interesting, and I'm curious, is that a trend? Have some of those pandemic changes stuck around?
I've definitely seen lots of examples of that in Portland and in other cities, and I think what that kind of gets to is like one of the special things I think about cities. We often think about government like, the executive branch, or the real power is in, state government. But cities, like municipalities, have control over a lot of the things that really touch our day-to-day life, traffic, transport, parks. And also city government is much closer to like your average citizen in terms of having your voice heard. So I think in some of those cases where those, sidewalk restaurant seating opened up during the pandemic and stuck was because of public outcry. And also business owners, where I think usually, contrary to, I mean, business owners don't want to get rid of parking because they think it might cut down on their business, but actually foot traffic often brings in much, much more business and, higher, higher foot traffic, more people coming into your shop. But it's having something like that to kind of force a pilot of it opens up people's eyes to what the benefits could be. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, that would never have necessarily happened. And then it just did happen. And then all of a sudden, everyone, I think, was kind of like, oh, is this great?
It speaks to that kind of pilot experience that Katie was referencing, that just kind of, we get so stuck in the ways that we think things are supposed to be. And why wouldn't cities need to evolve to meet the changing demands of people, and also the changing kind of focus of our culture, our understanding of including more people in cities. But sometimes you just have to kind of change something in order, that was what was so freaky and weird and fun about this horrible time of the pandemic, was to kind of just have things have to forcibly kind of get shooken up a little bit, and then people, are more willing. Change is hard. I'm guessing. Katie, would you agree?
I mean, I would definitely agree.
But it happens.
But you're right. It showed that things can be done a different way. And that's why piloting is great, because it's low cost, it's low risk. So, try something out and be flexible. And that's hard for government, because you can't just be frivolous with tax money, hopefully, no, but so try something out, see if it works, and there's less pressure. Don't put all your money into this big project that might not, might not work. And then that politician is linked to that and they are unpopular. Like, you can see why these things get stuck and they don't happen. But kind of being agile, being creative, trying things out with little risk is like, then you might be able to see some change.
And parents are good at it, right? We have to be agile and we have to try things out all the time. I think so. To close, I'm curious how you think parents, caregivers, people who care about our littlest society members, how can we advocate for this in our cities? Is it just looking for, like Sarah says, like a parking lot that possibly could be something else, or what's the best way for the everyday person to get involved?
The guerrilla attempts. I don't know if you support this, you're a policy person, but the guerrilla pothole fillers in Oakland, or the guerrilla, there are these guys that make benches for bus stops, because very few of the bus stops actually have benches, and they just install them all over the city at night, and the power of seeing that is huge.
I love that.
So should we go guerrilla or go to City Hall?
I think both.
Run for office.
I mean, I think we definitely need more people with these lived experiences running for office, 100%. But I think both, I love the idea of the public saying, we need a bench here. Like, we'll put one in. And then you could see lawsuits and all kinds of things and why it couldn't maybe last, but maybe it starts the conversation. And city officials should be working for people and listening to people. So I think in terms of your question, Miranda, how do parents kind of make a change? There's power in numbers. And if you can have different people coalesce around this common goal, then you could, you have to just hold power to account. Your elected officials are there to serve you. And if you're saying we want our city to be a place where our children and we can thrive, that's a really, really great thing. you should have the government support in that. But especially if you can get diverse groups together, if it's parents, if it's, religious groups, if it's schools, everyone coming together saying, this is something that's really important to us. And we all agree, and we're asking you for this. And if maybe, I think that's what we see. That is an interesting piece of this. Sometimes the government I'm talking about city government, they want to make changes because they want better health outcomes for their kids, but the public don't want it because they don't want to get rid of their cars, for example. But if the elected officials see this is a winning platform, this is popular, this is what people want, then you're really gonna get traction, and you're really gonna see change. So if there's a groundswell of people saying this is what we want in our city, then I think that's a powerful place to come from.
Thank you for that. I'm feeling, I did reach out to our city council rep about that kind of passageway to school that I told you about, which I only noticed when I moved into this neighborhood from a place that was just a few blocks away from the school and much more accessible. And I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm feeling motivated to kind of gather some people together, and then also to take into mind the interests of people with other needs that are community based. Like, I don't want to, we don't need to displace the unhoused community in order to do this, or get rid of the cars that need to be driving. But there are things we could create, barriers we could reduce, like you said, that that seem interesting and manageable to me. I mean, it's also kind of something to do that has an impact in a time when it feels like we have very little impact on some of the larger political,
I think so.
shenanigans.
I hope that there's some optimism, because I think, starting small in your local, place, you could make real impact. And then that has a ripple effect. But the other thing, I think, beyond, like you say, having a really diverse coalition of people wanting the same thing is gathering really compelling evidence. So, if you can say, we've had this many injuries because of these potholes, or, we have air quality monitors and the air quality level is above World Health Organization standards for pollution. Like, what are you going to do about it? Those types of things are compelling and might actually push people to action.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love that. It feels very doable. The idea of, we have a little bit of an air quality issue at our school, and it hasn't occurred to me to put an air quality monitor there. But I know people have them at their homes. So I could just buy one for the school maybe and put it up.
It's definitely,
and maybe then we'd have some, I just feels very manageable.
It's harder to ignore if you have some kind of good data like that than just saying, we all kind of know this could be better, but then it's harder to action that. But if you have something concrete to show, then
yes, thank you. So Katie, we always close by asking for culture recommendations. Is there anything that you're loving lately?
Well, I'm not sure if I go highbrow on here or lowbrow, but
we say unibrow. Give us all of it.
There we go.
One thing I've been enjoying with my kids is a book, like a kid's book that I read as a kid. My mom always read to me and my sister, and I loved. And usually when I say to my kids, "Oh, I love this book when I was a kid," they immediately want nothing to do with it and just want to hide it.
Yes,
but
relatable. But
both of my kids are on board with this book. I don't know if you guys have come across it, The Bed Book.
No.
It's fantastic. It's actually by Sylvia Plath, who she did write. She wrote some kids' books for her own children before she committed suicide. And it's a beautiful, fun, amazing book. So I think it came out in the US in the 70s. And I think part of what's so great about it is the illustration. So there's I think there are different illustrators. The one that we had that I tried to get for my kids, the illustrator is named Emily Arnold McCulley. So I think the original book had black and white illustrations, which don't draw you in as much. But it's this beautiful book about kind of just imaginative, every different kind of bed. So, there's a bed that's an igloo, a bed that's a bear, all kind, a bed that looks like a little pea, but if you pour water on it, it turns into a bed. So even if someone doesn't have a bed, it's just lovely. And the verse is like kind of, it all rhymes. It's like a poem. So that'd be my rec.
Oh, that's
That
fabulous.
sounds awesome.
Yeah. Great.
They did, speaking of witches, they did like around Halloween at we call it the feminist bookstore, the witch store, the feminist bookstore. This is what I love about living in the city.
Are they all within 15-minute walking distance?
They are actually.
You're set.
It's actually called Womb House Books. It's a fabulous bookstore and merch store. I got my Jane Austen hat from there, and soon to be imprint. They're going to be publishing, based in Oakland. But they did like a Sylvia Plath seance around Halloween that I sadly missed. But
did she attend?
I don't know. I don't know if they got her there, if she arrived. I mean, I'm sure she was there in some form, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the kind of extracurricular I want to be involved in.
Well, thank you, Katie, so much. This was wonderful and really gave us a lot to think about.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thanks for listening to Mother of It All. And like my mom always said, how's the view down there?
The Mother of It All is produced by Opus Knox Media with music from It's Electric. If you liked this episode, why not send it to a friend right now? Go on, we'll wait. You can follow us on Substack at themotherofitall.substack.com, where subscribing will get you episodes and bonus posts in your inbox and connect you with the Mother of It All listener community. Plus, become a paid subscriber and get a hot off the presses Mother of It All canvas tote. We're also on Instagram at The Mother of It All, and you can email us anytime with ideas or feedback at motherculturepod@gmail.com.